Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and have you ever wanted to explore an ancient Egyptian tomb? Egyptian culture has always fascinated me, from creatures like the Anubis, to Horus, the old gods, to Queen Cleopatra, for example. And in this case, we get to play as an explorer in one of these tombs, trying to figure out exactly what's going on in Hieroglyphika. The game is $9.99 and came out on the Steam store today. It does have a 10% discount on launch, and before I begin, I want to make sure you guys know that this key was obtained from the developer for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So what is Hieroglyphika? Well, it's a turn-based roguelike game, and it's one of my favorite genres. But this game is a little bit different from other games in the genre, games like Death Skid Marks, or even roguelites like Rogue Legacy. For example, in Rogue Legacy, when you bought a sword from the smithy, it would tell you exactly what the sword did. Maybe it gave you an extra health for killing an enemy. Well, that's not the case in Hieroglyphika. Although it does tell you, it just tells you via symbols and pictures, very similar to hieroglyphics back in ancient Egyptian culture, hence the name of the game, of course. Alright, for this run, for example, I found myself a nice little shield and a nice axe in some of the sarcophaguses here. Sarcophagi, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you guys get the idea. So the idea here is to get to the end of the stage, get deeper and deeper into the tomb, exploring and finding more items, making yourself a little bit more powerful. Now, I use the word powerful there very carefully because depending on the equipment that you've got or the enemies that you're going up against, it can be a very different situation of whether you have an advantage or a disadvantage in terms of combat and the abilities that your items will give you. So let's pause the video here and take a look at this axe's stats. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, Dragnix, I have absolutely no idea what any of the information on screen means. You haven't given me a tutorial, and you haven't exactly explained what's going on. Well, that's exactly the point. This is one of the major mechanics of the game, experimenting with the items and figuring out exactly what they do. Now, for example, this axe that I've equipped, I know that it sets enemies on fire. And taking a look at the picture there, if you notice the axe symbol and what's to the right of it, that's a symbol for fire. It's telling me that it's able to set enemies on fire, just not directly. So as I go through the game and get more information about what all these symbols mean, I can use that information to my best abilities at this point. Because one of the great things about the design of this game is that each item has a clear strength and weakness against the enemies in question. Now, even at this point, I still don't know exactly everything that's going on here. This spell, for example, no idea what it does. I know that I can cast it on myself, and it has some effect, but what that effect is, I haven't determined yet. Now, I do have one major complaint, and that has to do with the UI here. Now, it's great having that information on screen, and when I hover over something, it shows me that item. But even if I don't select anything else, the information goes away, and I don't see the reason for that. But it's not just about the weapons and the items in this case. You have to pay attention to every little single detail about this game in order to make it to the end of the level with as minimal damage as possible. Now, I kill this enemy here and he drops a negative health, which unfortunately goes right for me. Now, in certain cases, that may be beneficial. Wait, how is negative health beneficial in some cases? Well, it's beneficial if I have the right item, for example, which turns it into a health bonus for me. This indirect information processing is a critical point on whether or not you will enjoy this game or not. If you like things told with you in neon lights, for example, this game isn't for you. But if you like noticing that in the top left, a little fire has developed in the environment in question, you'll be able to figure out that a fireball is about to come down the screen, and you probably should get out of the way. This complements the simple yet effective combat rather nicely. Now, you can go in there guns a-blazing, but you're going to die in that case. But knowing that I can hit this enemy, they put a negative health drop on the field. And knowing that I can use my shield to bash it back into the next enemy, that's where the critical portion of the game comes in. It's all about strategy, it's all about tactics, and it works in this case. However, that same strength will also turn into a weakness for some players as well. As I mentioned before, the game is strongest when you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on, that you may not have the optimal solution to things and you need to experiment with the items and figure out what's going on. But once you determine that, there's always seemingly an optimal solution depending on the equipment that you have, and not a lot of variance in it. Sure, you get different enemies and different enemy types that you may not have the right equipment for, but if you do have the right equipment, there's always an optimal solution, and in terms of variety in that case, there isn't necessarily a lot. That's not to say that the items here aren't unique from each other. The fact is that getting this wind spell, for example, even though it's very similar to the shield bash, it changes things a lot. The ability to throw a wind blast at someone and push them into the wall, causing them damage, is rather fun. It's just that over time, you'll see that item over and over and over again. I do think that if the game gets a little bit more in terms of item variety, it definitely can have a greater effect for the longevity of the game. In that same breath, I have to give the creators credit here. The fact is that the items that are here, even though there are 1 or 2 items that just affect the stats at the top of the screen, most of the items feel rather unique. This fire axe feels a lot different from the ice lance, because not only will the effect like fire and ice change, but the range of the item, the cooldown of the item, your movement speed. A lot of the secondary stats get affected, and I really enjoy that. Now, like most roguelikes, the game is procedurally generated, and in particular, you'll always seem to find the same enemies in terms of the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. They all really have the same distribution from game to game. I did want to see a little bit more variety there. Now, if you haven't figured this out already, I think the strength of the game, and its biggest strength, is its game design and its game mechanics, and those learning mechanics in particular. Now, what about the weakest element of the game? Well, the weakest element of the game for me is the UI and technical implementations. And I'm not talking UI in terms of information. I understand those decisions, but it's more so the actual interaction with things and the lack of options that I'm talking about. For example, this game only really has one resolution option. Now, the game does have a full screen and a windowed mode, but the fact is the windowed mode always defaults to your desktop's resolution. If you wanted to make it smaller, like you've got multiple things going on at once, and considering this is a turn-based game, it's rather slow, the fact is you can't do that, and that is rather annoying. I really do think that resolution options, a couple of basic ones, is rather a basic of PC gaming, and I was disappointed for this game in terms of its lack of options. You can change the music, you can change the sound, but you can also not do that from this menu. You actually literally have to go back to the title screen. And even when you were in full screen mode, when you alt-tabbed into it, it took it a little bit of time to try to get back to where it needed to be. Like, you couldn't necessarily select an action right away. It's also the UI that's sort of bothersome here in terms of in combat. Now, when you select something, it will come up with a little bit of a menu so that you have little options that you can click on. For example, I click on this hand here to open that up. Now, when you have a lot of enemies and a lot of interactables in a small area at this point, it can get actually very, very precise of where you need to click. And there are no keyboard shortcuts at this point. It's all done with the mouse. Now, while I don't expect the game to have controller support, for example, especially the fact that it doesn't say it has controller support on the Steam store page, I do expect a little bit of options in terms of the ability to manipulate the environment and things. Maybe the ability to select an action via the number keys when you've got something selected would have been nice in this case. I thought that maybe it was a mobile holdover, maybe there was some mobile aspirations for this game, but when I thought about it more, it didn't make a lot of sense. You don't like putting overlays right on top of what you just selected because deselection can be sort of annoying in this case. Now, aesthetic-wise, I think the game does a great job in terms of its visuals. Yes, you're going to see a lot of orange backgrounds because this is a pyramid, and you're going to see a lot of design work in terms of that ancient Egyptian style. But when I got a different item, for example, it was noticeable. When I saw the ice, it was noticeable even if it was simplistic. I think the simple design works here, and I think the little touches like the weapons add to it. The sound quality in terms of the sound effects is alright. You do get effects for things like the sarcophagus opening or ice breaking, but the quality of the sounds isn't necessarily the greatest, but I don't expect it at a cheaper game. Where the game's presentation fails is its music. There seems to be only one track that plays over and over again. Now, if there are more than one track, I wasn't able to determine, the differences between them. And in particular, in this case, the repetition of that one track, it was very easy to see where it started and where it ended. So I could hear that repetition, and it just caused me to turn it off almost immediately. Even if you were to go only open source in terms of the music in question, I know open source isn't necessarily the right term there, but I think people know what I mean. Even if you went that route and wanted to keep the theming of the game intact, I felt like you could have done a good job even with those free soundtracks. You want something slow, something boding, something that, causes a little bit of a sense of dread because you are in a difficult situation. In terms of a target audience, I think Hieroglyphika, in terms of roguelike players, will do an okay job. But the thing is, it is more suited for players who have an attention to detail, in particular like puzzle elements of games that aren't necessarily puzzle elements. A tactical player here will like the elements that the game has, especially if they pay attention to that detail. If you're looking for action, unfortunately I will have to say this, the game's pace is slow. Turns take a while, it could use a little bit of a speed up there, but honestly, it is for those slow and methodical players at this point. The game won't be blowing the doors off the genre, it doesn't have that much innovation, but I did like the unique sort of take of the hieroglyphics of the game and the fact that you didn't necessarily get taught everything that you possibly need to know. The fact is, it is a solid game, not a great game. Alright, this is Dragnix signing out. If you found this video useful, you can hit that like button or share it with a friend, and I will put the Steam review in the description below. In addition, if you have any more questions about this game for me, let me know in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer them. Alright, I will see you all later. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button in the middle of the screen. The last video I did will be in the top left, and a related video to this will be in the top right. I do have a Twitter handle at the bottom left, and a Facebook page at the bottom right. And of course, you can always subscribe to the Google Plus portion. Anyway, thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.